Hello, and welcome to the Healthcare Facilities Network Special Veterans Day 2023 show. As always, thank you for clicking on. Today's episode has at its core an event that occurred in 1952 off the coast of Massachusetts, off the coast of Cape Cod. A tanker called the Pendleton broke in half, broke in two during a blizzard, and a small 36-footer out of the Chatham, Massachusetts Coast Guard station was dispatched to save the lives of the men in that split-apart ship. Those events in 1952 had a profound impact on the life of one of my guests. Vince Patton, who joins me, was Master Chief Petty Officer of the United States Coast Guard from 1998 to 2002. He retired from the Coast Guard, had a long and distinguished career. But this event in 1952 shaped his life. He wasn't even born when it happened, yet it shaped his life. So we talk about some leadership lessons, and we talk about that story, which frankly is amazing that the men who went out there lived. I'm also joined by my friend Ed Loughran. Ed, like Vince, is a former member of the United States military. Ed owns Charles River Wine Cellars here in Walpole, Massachusetts. No, Charles River Wine Cellars does not run hospital facilities department, but Ed is a history buff. Ed knows the story well. Ed fishes the waters off of Cape Cod, so Ed joined me on this episode, which I was very happy for. We talk about leadership, and Vince will also talk to me. This is the third time I've had Vince on, and it's always enjoyable because you always learn a lot. I have kind of a leadership crisis going on right at the beginning of this episode. I ask Vince a question about it, and he talks me off the leadership ledge. So I hope you'll enjoy this episode. We cover a lot of ground. We talk about leadership. We talk about military leaders. We talk about the Detroit Lions. So if you're a football fan, stay tuned. We also talk about the episode from 1952 with the Pendleton and the Coast Guard rescue. So I hope you enjoy this episode. If you are a veteran, thank you for your service. So whether you're watching this episode before Veterans Day or after Veterans Day, hope that your day was a peaceful one. As always, thank you for watching, and now please enjoy our Veterans Day 2023 episode. Hello, and welcome to the Healthcare Facilities Network. I am your host, Peter Martin of Gossam Martin Associates. As always, thank you for clicking on this video. You will notice we have somebody in-house sitting next to me. That's never happened before, so Ed, you're the first one. And then we also have via Virginia, my friend Vince Patton from Virginia, Ed Loughran from Walpole, Mass. I will ask both gentlemen if they could please introduce themselves. Vince, you have been on the network a number of times. You can do a better job introducing yourself than I can. Welcome back. Thank you for joining. We had some technical difficulties before we started this. That's why Ed is sitting next to me. His office is about 10 minutes from mine. On my end, I couldn't get the audio working, so I did what every good IT person does. I shut my computer down, I started it back up, and it works. So I'm happy to have Ed here. Vince, could you please introduce yourself, though? Why don't you go first?
Oh, hello, good morning, good afternoon, whenever you listen to the podcast. Vince Patton. I retired after 30 wonderful years in the U.S. Coast Guard. Gosh, it's coming up on 21 years in my retirement now.
Wow.
I know I look good for a guy that's 69 years old.
Still smiling.
Like I said, I had a real wonderful career in the Coast Guard. In fact, a little bit of the topic that we're going to talk about today was my reason for coming in the Coast Guard. I've been all over, starting with my career in basic training, or boot camp as we call it, in Cape May, New Jersey, across the country to California, back across the country to New York, to the Great Lakes to, where did I go after that? Back to the East Coast, up to Alaska, and then back to the East Coast and so forth. So I crisscrossed the planet, including 2 overseas assignments, one in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, as well as Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. So I had a pretty well-rounded career, and then retirement. I got into academia. I was teaching ethics at University of California, Berkeley for 2 years, and then moved back east and went to work for a big company called Monster.com, and 7 years there. And then back into academia I went, which is what today I'm doing kind of two jobs. I teach leadership and ethics as well as introduction to public speaking for Northeast Maritime Institute, which isn't very far from where you are. It's in Fairhaven, Massachusetts, and I actually commute from here in the Washington D.C. area up there one day a week to teach my class. And I'm also senior vice president for leadership and development for a mortgage company called New Day USA, which is based here in the Washington D.C. area.
So you're slowing down in retirement from the Coast Guard?
No, nowhere near. The running joke I tell everybody is well, you know, when are you going to get some rest? I says, I'll get plenty of rest when I'm dead.
Hopefully far in the future.
Far in the
This guy next to me.
Well, my name is Ed Loughran. I'm a good friend of Pete Martin's. I've been a side listener to Pete's podcast since he started it. I really enjoy what he's done. I'm not in the hospital facilities industry, but a lot of the podcasts that he's had are definitely germane to other businesses. And I particularly liked listening to Vince over the last year on his first episode when he talked about leadership. So I'm honored to be here as a passenger and seeing how it gets done behind the scenes.
The magic.
So, yeah. So thank you, and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
So Ed, and I'm just going to put a brief plug in for you. Ed also owns a small business. It's called Charles River Wine Cellars up here in the Boston area. So Ed does fantastic work. And it's funny, Ed, I was actually thinking Ed's very handy. Ed's good making things. You're a mason. I mean, he can fix anything. Ed would be a good healthcare facility professional. You could definitely be a director in a hospital, but he's got his own business and he builds wine cellars. So if you're interested in wine cellars, I'm telling you, it is fantastic work that he does. Charles River Wine Cellars, check it out. And the reason Ed is here, what we want to talk to Vince about today is a tragedy that occurred in 1952 off the coast of Massachusetts. If you have listened to my episodes with Vince in the past, he's alluded to the Pendleton and to a Coast Guard save that occurred in 1952. I don't want to tell any more of that. I want to let Vince kind of jump in. But Ed likes that there's a book about it. There's a movie about it. Ed goes fishing off the Cape. So when I told Ed that Vince was going to come on and we were going to talk about the Pendleton from 1952, I was like, why don't you join? Because Ed's done a lot of research on it. So that's why Ed is here, and for other reasons too. But that's kind of why he's seated next to me. But, you know, Vince, before we get into the Pendleton, congratulations, number one, on being you were the Master of Ceremonies, the Grand Marshal in your hometown of Detroit this past weekend. We are videotaping this on November 9th. And so let me say happy Veterans Day, both to Vince and to Ed. Ed is a Marine. Vince, you just heard his career. So happy Veterans Day to both these gentlemen. Thank you for your service. It's timely too.
Very.
Yes, very.
Honored to be here with Vince. This is really, really a pleasure. And I've been looking forward to it since Pete pitched me the initial invite. I thought he was joking at first, and I'm like, what do I have to offer? But I'm honored to be here. So thank you.
And Vince, I know that you are very proud of your hometown, your home state. You were the Grand Marshal for the 18th annual Detroit Veterans Day Parade just this past Sunday. Tell us about that, if you don't mind.
Well, you know, and this is my second time I became a Grand Marshal of a big Veterans Parade, because last year I was the Grand Marshal for the New York City Veterans Day Parade, which is the granddaddy of them all. Their 103rd.
Wow.
But to tell you, even though I've been to, like, you know, as you say, the mountaintop with being Grand Marshal for New York, you know, to my New York friends and so forth, and I very much appreciate the accolade and the thank yous I got for doing that. It just couldn't compare to going to my hometown of Detroit. you know, they're definitely a lot smaller scale than New York, but
Sure.
nonetheless, it was just huge because this is where I'm from, and I, you know, in my high school, they honored me as well. The Detroit Lions. I've been a long time. I mean, I've been with the Detroit Lions. You know,
I was gonna ask you about the Lions, because I remember when we talked last, we talked a little bit about that, and they're having a great year so far.
having a great year, and so they're inviting me to be honored as the hometown hero next month in December. Stand by for that LinkedIn announcement because I'll be in Detroit again for that. But I don't know how to explain it beyond, you know, it's the place. It's where it all started for me, and for the city to honor me and honor me for my service, honor me for the things that I've done throughout my military career. It's overwhelming, and wonderfully overwhelming that gosh, I still pinch myself saying, did this really happen?
Who are the Lions playing?
Denver Broncos.
And so that's next. So that's December.
December 17th.
Awesome. What a
Congratulations.
Yeah, what a
That's a
great
nice honor.
what a great honor. And you know, that's kind of a lead in, actually, Vince, to something I wanted to ask you about again before we get into Pendleton. You obviously you come across, just even visually, kind of as a leader with your style, and your career is based on leadership, and you're still doing leadership. And you know, you mentioned the Lions and Dan Campbell and their coach. He's an interesting guy to me to watch because he's a leader kind of in a different, he's motivational, he's emotional, he'll cry. And you could see why men in that environment would lead and follow him. But I feel, and I don't know what you guys think, Vince, I feel that today, and maybe it's part of it, is the social media influence that is just so overwhelming. I don't know that there's a lack of leadership, but it just doesn't. And this isn't just political. I mean, I think it's in all realms of society across the world, not just the United States. You see what's going on across the globe now. Is there a dearth of leadership these days? Or I feel, again, I just feel like there's no true leaders anymore. Everybody's reactive. Am I wrong? Or what do you think?
I don't like to tell anybody when they're wrong.
You can always tell me when I'm wrong.
I would say you're a little incorrect that there are no true leaders. I think what has happened, and first of all, when you talked about social media, it's a plus and a minus, because from the plus side, and my goodness, I wish I had social media platforms back when I was on active duty, because for the things that I had done, I mean, email was the big thing for me, because that was my social media. And to graduate to to how we have it now, podcasts, things along those lines. I think that's that opportunity now that sort of rises more to the top, that we see leadership more coming about. And you use Dan Campbell as one example, who I love. I mean, I love this guy for his leadership, and for for somebody that came into an organization that was the bad news Lions, using the term of the bad news Bears, and to motivate them from that. Because here's the key thing with the Detroit Lions. It's to just anyone outside of being a Lions fan, you probably cannot name the star person beyond the quarterback. Everybody knows the quarterback of the team, but the rest, you're not sure. See, now that's a leader. That's somebody that you know who the leader is, and who of course rises up. And when the Lions got totally smashed, well, I forgot who it was. I wanted to forget who it was, to be honest with you.
Was it the Dolphins?
Yeah, the Dolphins. I wanted to forget who it was, but that leader, first of all, took ownership. I'm a big football fan, and I watch football, and I don't want to disparage you New England fans. I have yet to really see a leader up till the time I saw Dan Campbell, who announced and talked to the team, and first of all took ownership, and took ownership to the point of saying, well, okay, but okay, enough of beating up on me. Let's work on all of you so you will always be positive and get better. And then he said, and I can't quite remember the quote that he said, but it was something to the effect about understanding failure becomes your greatest success. Now that's a leader. That's the kind. So I can go beyond looking at Dan Campbell. I think of, there's a lot of other people that have become exceptionally well of being a good leader. For example, I can't remember his first name, but the guy that runs the UAW, and I'm not trying to say I'm extremely pro or against unions and so forth, but I mean, that guy, Maine is his last name, but that guy took ownership and leadership in terms of saying to the UAW workers what they had to do to get better. And I mean, this is a real tough time that who's going to talk somebody into taking off work, losing their pay, to fight for the efforts of what they feel is right as far as benefits. I mean, if you can inspire people and make them get things done to do what they want to become successful, that's your leadership. And that's what it is. So I think I've seen more, thanks in part to our social media, that I'm seeing more of that in terms of seeing those particular leaders. And now I'll tell you, Pete, I kind of get a little bit of your comment that, you don't think you see it because it gets overwhelmed in the wrong way with things that aren't going right. And we can only point to one area, and that's just a few miles from where I live, on Capitol Hill. I mean, we can have a whole discussion. But that gets mired from the politics and things along those lines to where we just don't think we see leaders anymore.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
But let's look at this from 50, 60 or so years ago, that when we looked at leaders, we saw them mostly from the political side of how they were able to engage and work people together and get things. And so we didn't quite, follow up on some of the other people who were also great leaders of their times 50 plus or so years ago. So I would say that they're there. You gotta, you may have to hunt for them because of the overwhelming visual effects that we're getting from social media. That kind of gives us an impression at times. And like I said, I'll take your comment about, you don't think you see them anymore. I'll take your comment with that sense of thought of that we get overwhelmed with seeing the negatives too much versus seeing the positives are.
Well, thank you for that answer. And I'm really glad that that's why I asked, because again, you're very inspirational and you kind of hit exactly what I see and feel. And you're right. I finished this book. I don't know if you ever read the Ian Toll series about the Pacific. It's a series of 3 books, and they're fantastic. And I finished this one last night. It's the second, and they were talking about Nimitz, and they were talking about Nimitz's leadership style and how he would engage with his men. Even, when he's head of the Pacific Fleet, he would engage with his men. He would take walks. He would listen to them, and he would make decisions. And his leadership style was so interesting. And I think sometimes you're right. I kind of get lost as a history person. These leaders are flawed too. We're all flawed, but you read about them and you're like, I just don't see it. So that's why thank you for answering the question that way, because you kind of hit on what I feel.
Yeah, and I'm glad to point that out about the history part, because history will show us, particularly with the people that we may know from the surface, that we say, well, that guy was a bad. It turns out, it was just an awesome leader. I take everybody, because with the last name of Patton, everybody jokingly said, "You related to General Patton?" And I would say with a joke back that, yeah, I think I am. But I have read so much about him, and that guy was a rotten guy in some parts, but you know what? He was a true definition of leader, because look at the successes that came out of it, and most importantly, the successes of others, people like General Omar Bradley, Dwight David Eisenhower. Those guys were, if they were alive today, they would reluctantly admit that he was, he mentored them. They were, because of the fact that he challenged them, he pushed them forward. He pushed his everybody, his troops that were under him. He pushed them all forward. He took the word imagine or imagination and made it and crystallized it more into this can happen and this will happen. So I like the history part, especially military history, which I'm very much fascinated on to see that. And again, they always rise up with that definition of leadership and how good it is.
Yeah, I mean, like you think about it, you know, they rise to a moment in time. Grant did it back in the Civil War. It's just, and you never know when that moment is. And Grant, you never know where that leader is.
Grant's the best. And I would say to all of you listeners out there and everything, you need to get into Grant. You really need to read a lot about General Ulysses, President Ulysses S. Grant, because the shaping of America would not have started its formation of it had it not been for him. You know, everybody credit Abraham Lincoln, particularly with, you know, and rightfully so, particularly with leading us through and after the Civil War. And, you know, of course, his life was cut short after that. But the mantle was not truly picked up until Ulysses S. Grant came about. So that's, you know, if you haven't read about that guy, read about that guy. And that will give you a mind-blowing experience about looking at leadership.
Well, I think that's the fascinating thing about Grant, and you're right. I mean, he's absolutely forgotten to history, but what he rose from, and listen, he had his warts as president. We all do, but he accomplished quite a bit and tried quite a bit in a tough time of American history.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, Ed.
That's all right. Again, happy to be here.
This is Peter Martin. If you or your organization is interested in advertising or partnering with the Healthcare Facilities Network, including sponsoring content, then please email me using the barcode in the lower right of your screen. From the trades level to the vice president level, from planning, design, construction, project management, compliance, safety, and security, the Healthcare Facilities Network reaches FM people where FM people are. Thanks for answering that, Vince. Let's talk about the Pendleton. And if you don't mind, could you talk about the significance in your life of an event that happened in 1952, which we'll discuss, February of 1952, the Pendleton rescue?
Well, yeah, it is a moment that it happened 2 years before I was born, but I always feel like I've lived it because I've read the book so many times, watched the movie so many times, and the fact that even before all that existed, it's how I joined the Coast Guard. And as you recall from when we first talked in our podcast, that it all happened when I walked into the Coast Guard recruiting office by mistake. I was on my way to join the Navy, Ed. And that's another story. But I walked into the wrong office, and I was too embarrassed to turn around and walk out. The recruiter's on the phone. So as I fidget around and start looking at things, I come across this unit citation that was issued to the crew of Coast Guard Station Chatham, and it talked about that big nor'easter that happened in February 1952, and the crew of 4 that went out and in a 36-foot motor surfboat, wooden motor surfboat, I got to add, because which means it's pretty light, that went out with a crew of 4 on a vessel that could take no more than 8 more people, went out and took 28 people off of a sinking half freighter and safely brought them back. And you know, and in fact, the only complaint I have about that movie was how they came back, with that the seas were no more comfortable or calm than when they went out. They went out in rough weather. They came in rough weather. You know, and the whole point behind all of that is that it will forever etch my mind. That I remember when I read that citation, and I said, "Wow!" And the Coast Guard recruiter said to me, "I guarantee you can do something like that in your first 4 years in the Coast Guard." Now that's what sold me in the Coast Guard. Never in the Navy, I was going in the Coast Guard. But the most important thing about that was about the people itself. You know, that who and what are these four guys that went out with no indication whatsoever that they could do what they did and come back alive? And then that puts me into thought, Ed being a Marine, you think about the many battles that Marines have fought and many sacrifices made. We think of Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal, Fallujah. We think about all of these particular wars and battles that Marines and other members of the military have fought and sacrificed for, that the crew of the four off that Coast Guard 36-500 was the whole number of that vessel, that they did the same thing. And so you think about those people that did it. Why did they do it? Well, they did it because it was a job they had to do. They did it with the interest and the thought mind that they have built and learned about confidence through leadership of others that had them go out to do things. I mean, I don't think anybody is going to just go walk into a fire and not expect that you're going to be safe coming out on the other end. But if you're built with enough confidence and understanding, you have your capabilities to do the best you can, your chances are much more perfect that you'll come out on the other end well.
Just an incredible story. Wasn't one of the crew members at the Coast Guard station just on a layover and went out with these three other Coast Guardsmen?
In fact, the one that was at the station that was just happened to be there, he had a pretty cushy job. He was going to a lighthouse, and I forgot which lighthouse he was supposed to go to. And the way it worked was, he did 2 weeks out on the lighthouse, 1 week vacation, if you want to call it, and then and the station Chatham was the one that would take him out to the lighthouse. So he's sitting there in the galley, drinking coffee, waiting for either the weather to die down or whatever the case may be, and he volunteers to go. And I think the other part to that is that in his volunteering to go was he had the most cushiest job in the Coast Guard. By way,
exactly.
He had to do was make sure that lighthouse was lit and turn it on and turn off the foghorn. That was back in the days before they really automated things and so forth. He covered weather reports and all that stuff. He did it from the confined insides of a structure, and yet he volunteered to go out to do something. Now, we never know in that decision making beyond how it was depicted in the movie as well as in the book, just what was his real reason of wanting to do that. But he did it because, first of all, he saw himself as part of that crew, part of that organization. If the rest of my Coast Guard shipmates can go out and do that, then I can do it too. I mean, and the fact that he willingly did it. I mean, nobody put a gun to his head or anything like that. He willingly went out to go do that.
It was so the book we're talking about, at least, is The Finest Hours, and there are other books about it. So it's a book that was released. There's also a movie by the same name called The Finest Hours. It's about the Pendleton. It was a 503-foot tanker that broke apart off the coast of New England, off Cape Cod, during a nor'easter that had 60-foot waves and winds gusting up to like 80 miles an hour at Logan Airport. So if they're gusting at Logan at 80, you're probably gusting at least that over the open ocean. The Pendleton breaks apart, stern one side, bow the other. These gentlemen, this Coast Guard station, Chatham, they get word that there's a ship broken apart. They go out to save them. Vince, what were and I know you talked about training, but like if you're just to sit back and think about it, what are the odds that they should have actually survived that? And both you and Ed, so the odds that they survived, but then if you guys could talk about there's a big challenge that they have to overcome before they even get to that ship. So what do you think the odds were that they should have survived? And then talk a little bit about the shoal and about that challenge and getting out to that tanker and finding it. I mean, there was no guarantee they were even going to get to it.
Exactly. Well, first and foremost, their chances of survival continually decreased from the time they got underway. First and foremost, before they got into the boat, maybe 20% chance, maybe. And then as they go out, weather's a lot worse than what was predicted and forecasted. The loss the loss of their navigation system, their compass. They didn't have radar on those boats back then, so it was strictly by going where you think it is. There's no street lights out on the ocean, so what you had was a coxswain, Bernie Weber, who was a coxswain of that 36-footer, used a little bit of instinct, but a lot of bit of experience in doing what he did. And so just him alone and those three other crew members increased their confidence of chance that Bernie was going to get them through it. Now, the good news is I had a chance to talk to Bernie Weber years later.
I want to ask you that if you ever met them.
Oh, yes, I did. In fact, and I'll get into that a little bit more. But I will quote this part of that discussion with him, that he saw a job he had to do. He raised his right hand to do the best he can, particularly for the saving of property and life at sea. And that's all he saw. He thought about his family at home. He was married, kids, he thought about everything that gave him 1,000 reasons to not do this. But the one reason that he had to do it was the built confidence of success that he learned through experience and felt very capable of doing that. Now, of course, he said when he told me when he started out, his confidence quickly diminished when all of a sudden you realize the weather was worse than what it was, and he was at a point of no return and turning back, because turning back was the same concern he was going to have about trying to get back safe and so forth. But he could not forget about the crew on that freighter. And the only thing that he always was most worried about after this was all done was the loss of the one crew member on the Pendleton. He said if you read the book and saw the movie and so forth, that it was a crew member trying to jump into the, because he had to time the boat a certain way to jump into the water or into the boat, and the crew would catch him, and the timing was just off, and the boat ended up smashing into the guy, and it was a chance that that unfortunately had happened, and that's what bothered him the most, and to his dying day, remembering that happened, and though he did not take it as he was at fault for that person dying, because he quickly remembered, 28 other people made it, and that was completely against the odds in itself. When the decision was made to do that, it was all about how many can I save, versus looking at it, none of you folks are going to make it, because he was clearly at a situation where it was all hope lost. When the 36-footer got to the Pendleton and seeing what the situation was, the honest answer to do at that point, I can't help you. That's really what it came down to. But on the contrary, he made it work.
Didn't he draw his inspiration from another Coast Guardsman who had manned one of the same style ships and had really made an impression on all of them of really just getting the job done? And this guy, I can't remember his name, but he's referenced in the book as one of the ones who tried going out, I think.
Was it like the year before they died? They couldn't get out? Because I think the book tells that story, right? Where it was the year before he was part of a crew member.
Right.
He was a crew member. He wasn't
where they tried going out multiple times. And
I wish I could remember the name. Like I said, I haven't picked up the book in a while.
Yeah. Yeah, they tried like 8 or 9 times, right? And they just couldn't do it. And
that was the experience that he brought with him.
Right.
He went out, because he remembered all of those particular things. And the one big thing, particularly for the Coast Guard in your neck of the woods, the historical background and legacy of the Coast Guard, particularly 100+ years or so, or even 200 years or so, of the amazing things of what of Coast Guardsmen, then known as the U.S. Life Saving Service, what they had done. And the most amazing type of thing is that you learn about that, and you learn about the fact that It's not a question about it can be done, but it will be done because you have to, first of all, grab hold completely with understanding experience. Take nothing for granted. Focus completely on making sure that you can do things 100% of the time, not 99, 98, and so forth. And that's what drives our folks in the Coast Guard, especially up in that particular area. I visited Station Chatham about a year ago. I was up there, and while everybody up there at Station Chatham were born well after this event, they live it. They understand it. They find it as more of an honor to be at that station and being at where that historic rescue had occurred, and of course all up and down and all around the 93,000 square miles of the Coast Guard's responsibility. Every Coast Guardsman is embedded with that understanding of about, it's an old phrase about you have to go out, you don't have to come. Now, of course,
Yeah,
That's an incredible.
very amended to the fact we want you to come back. Therefore, we will work, train, and very hard for you to, the other part of that, you have to go out, is that you have to come back. And I think that's probably what makes our service so unique. And nothing against all the other services, because I've got just as much honor and love for each of my fellow service. But I think our Coast Guard is so unique, not just because it's small, but because we are always reminded about something like that 1952 rescue.
Mm-hmm.
yeah. Can you guys talk about, if you want to start? I know you were out there fishing just a couple of days ago. It was beautiful. A couple of days ago, not so nice. But what was the challenge? What was the oceanic challenge in getting out from the Coast Guard station out to that boat? Can you talk a little bit about that shoal and the waves breaking and one of their first challenges?
I'm gonna let Ed go first on that. Go ahead.
Well, I wouldn't really know much about how much it takes to get out through that surf, but I've seen videos of Coast Guard training where they're mostly I think it was from like the West Coast, like up in
Portland, right?
Washington, Portland,
Yeah, Portland,
where they have those
Cape Disappointment.
Yes, where they have those rescue boats that are self-righting,
Right.
and how difficult it is in a boat that's probably got a couple of 400 engines on the back of it.
Yeah.
How difficult it is to get out, and to think of the guys in that 36-500 with a
what did they
how
have
big of
on
an
that?
engine could that have been? I mean, it must have been, it couldn't have been more than 150 horsepower.
Yeah, I don't remember the actual nomenclature of it. I believe it was a General Motors product engine. No, it was not. It was nothing near. In fact, that engine of 1952 compared to the engines of today on 47-foot self-riding motor lifeboats, it's about a third of the power of what we have today. But so going out into the jetty, crossing the bar, as is referred to, getting over the hump, is not just extremely dangerous, but oftentimes treacherous and difficult. I mean, there are times, particularly with the older boats, you had to take 3 or 4 passes to try to go through and to get over that. And today, that 47-footer out of Station Chatham, it gets it and goes over there like it's nothing to it, But again, these are all the kind of skill sets that our folks in the Coast Guard today are trained and capable of doing.
So Vince, when you say it takes 3 or 4 passes to get through that, and I apologize for some questions, does that mean literally trying to break through and you fail because maybe there's a big wave, so you go back and you try it again? Is it more of the 3 or 4 is based on the timing to get through it?
Yes, that is correct. And particularly as you're trying to get through it, what you're really doing is you're going, and I apologize to the people who are just listening to this podcast versus seeing it. So I'll try to describe what I'm doing here. But when the boat is coming up into the wave, what happens is the boat flips up, and what you don't want it to do is to flip back,
Yeah.
and of course that's it, except for these self-riding motor lifeboats that the Coast Guard has now. They can do it and flip around and just jump at it again. But that's what you've got to be careful with, is as you're going up into the wave or into the curl, as that's called, is how you ride over the curl to get over it. And that's a crucial time, because this type of engineering of getting a vessel that you wanted over the bar real quickly, it's about time, because making 2, 3, 4 passes that's time eaten from getting to the scene where you need to be. And sometimes those 2, 3, 4 passes might take up to a half an hour. This isn't a matter of just seconds of things happening, but when you fail to get over that bar, the timing, because of how the waves are coming, how you've got to position the vessel in such a way to be able to ride it through, it takes a lot of time, and in a rescue, that's time you don't have.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I've always thought of that. I mean, they're 35-foot boat, you got 60-foot waves, even on a self-righting boat. I mean, you're going up and the wave is breaking above your head.
And I think the best way to describe it, and as I'll say to your podcast listeners and viewers, just go to YouTube and Google Coast Guard motor lifeboat or Coast Guard 47-footer, or something along those lines. And I want you to watch it, so that sort of explains clearly what I'm talking about, of how those vessels, particularly today, how they're engineered to be much, much more capable of being able to get out and respond to the emergencies as compared to last. But this is the amazing thing. In 1952, that 36-foot boat, it was wooden, remember, that means it was light, and an engine that nowhere near capable of the engine of today, had to do it. And Bernie Weber got that thing over in one haul. He got that over there.
Incredible. I've seen the boat. They restored it, and its summer base is down at Rock Harbor in Orleans, and you can walk down and go right up next to it. You can't go on it, but it's just fascinating to see something like that, and to imagine 4 guys in that crawling up over the waves just to get out there is one thing, but then to think of them coming back with a packed house. I mean, would you say 28 plus the 4? Just, I mean, it didn't look like you could handle more than 12 people on that.
Exactly. In fact, at the end of if you saw the movie, at the end of the movie, they were flashing pictures, and then they actually showed the boat as it come in with all the people piled on top. So the amazing thing, like I said, they were able to get back. One thing about getting out there, I think the real started getting back, and the sad thing about the movie in particular didn't really talk about how they got back, because getting back was just as bad, because the compass was out. There was, you had people piled on top of each other, holding on to each other for dear life, and the one at the anchor part of that holding on to something for dear life, and so forth. And it was just amazing. It was probably, and I would say to everyone that's listening or watching and so forth, that's the other Google you need to do. Google CG 36500. CG 36500. That's the number of that, the nomenclature of that vessel that Bernie Weber went out on. Because you'll look at it, just as they had said, the first thing you look at is, oh hell no, this didn't happen. Creative thing could happen, but it did. And I think that to some people, when you think about that particular rescue and how that happened, the first thing you might want to do is be mad at the commanding officer for even ordering a guy to go out there to do that. And now the movie kind of gets a little bit Hollywood on that, because truth of the matter, it was very well calculated, very well discussed. The chief warrant officer, who was the commanding officer of the station, was not 100% for it, but he wasn't 100% against it. But it was all about making sure he had the right person running that, and there was a lot of collaboration between the station, the district office out of Boston, as well as the group, which groups are a bunch of stations all around together, and the group happened to have been out of Woods Hole at that time. That there were a lot of people there that came up with that decision for Bernie to go out. So it wasn't a case of just haphazardly, okay, I'm going to go John Wayne this,
Yeah.
There's a lot of people's lives at stake here, and so to its capability of what the Coast Guard has, can you do it? And and I want to tell you this, because while the 50, we're talking about the rescue of the Pendleton, there's been a lot of modern day things that happen in the Coast Guard as well. And I think about during my tenure as Master Chief of the Coast Guard, I had a situation. Well, not me personally, but off the coast of Virginia, Coast Guard Station Cape Charles, which is along I guess they call it the Outer Banks of Virginia area and so forth. Went out on a rescue case in a 41-foot utility boat. Now what we mean by that is that these were those older, capable, good weather type go out and rescue kind of things. That particular vessel went out in rough seas and brought back it brought back a crew of 7 from a sinking tugboat. And they went out and they did it, and it was kind of the same thing, because and a lot of discussion went in, because that 41-foot boat was the only one that was capable, at least from a response situation, to go out to do it. So what's your option? The weather was too bad for a helicopter, and the boat was the best they could do. But the intent of the boat really was to go out, try to be on station, so when a helicopter could go out, that you could at least know where it is, or if you had the people abandon the tug, that they could pick them up and hold on to it. But they went out and did it. They went out and made it like it was textbook perfect. And the guy by the name of Joe Hable, he was the chief boatswain mate at the station, and he was the officer in charge of that station. He took the responsibility of going out. Again, we talk about leaders. The guy in charge went out to do it. Which Coast Guard protocol, the guy in charge is supposed to stay put because you got to do all these other things. But he actually, put his exec in command. Wow. While he went out, and here's the other funny story, because I went out to pin the medal, the Coast Guard medal, on him and his crew. And Joe Hable did the same thing Bernie Weber did back in 1952 when they were going to get Bernie Weber a medal. He says, I will not accept the medal unless every crew member gets the same medal I got. And the Coast Guard medal, most prestigious type of heroic rescue cases that you ever want to know. Wow. I went out there to pin the medal on Joe Hable and his crew. And the funny, well, I don't know if you want to say funny, but the interesting, inspiring story out of that is I talked to the crew. As they were getting the crew to go out, the crew got into a fight over. They actually almost got into fisticuffs over who was going to go. Wow. This is all about the fact that, hey, if the chief is going to do this, I know this is going to be all right. They actually almost got into a little fisticuff of who got to go. And Joe had to finally shut them all up and says, you, and that was it,
It's incredible. Although we're talking about the 1952 rescue, it sounds like this type of bravery goes on day in and day out, and we only know these couple of stories. And
yes,
it always fascinates me. I'm a big fan of Deadliest Catch, and when you see those helicopters going out and they're snow blind and they're really just calculating down to the minute of when they have to turn around for fuel. It's just, it blows you away. It makes you feel so incredibly grateful that there are people that will do that.
Yes.
Well, the one I was thinking of going along, Vince, and this was during your time. I don't know if you were here on the East Coast, was what we call the perfect storm out here in October of '91, where where they lost the Andrea Gale, but where you send helicopters and boats out to save a sailboat, and the guys are jumping in the water in 60-foot waves. I mean, how many you were around then? So
I was around in '91. I was at Coast Guard headquarters at the time, but pretty much familiar with what was going on at that particular time and so forth. And and again, here's the big thing that and this is why, I mean, we've got a recruiting problem in the Coast Guard right now, but I want to make it clear to everybody, part of our recruiting problem has more to do with when we talk to people about interest of coming in, the explanation of the fact that you really have to cut it, no matter what job you're going to do and so forth. So we're very selective. We're very, very selective because it's all about capability to do the job when you have to do it.
Mm.
And I think that's more important because, and again, not knocking any of the service, and I'm not, because everybody has different requirements and different needs and so forth. But particularly for the Coast Guard, even if you are trained to do one particular thing, you have to be capable of doing other types of things as well. And it's challenging, and it's a little bit more than just hard work, which is why the whole importance of getting people in to do things because they are inspired by what others have done and capabilities to do. That's hard leadership, because this is one thing to sit somebody down and watch the finest hours and says, okay, now we want you to come in and do just that. But more importantly, it's about looking at the legacy of the service itself. This is why I like the Marines so well. This is why I have so much respect for the Marine Corps as a whole, because that's how the Marine Corps does it. Not every Tom, Dick, and Harry can join the Marine Corps. Period. The end. I mean, and I think people that know people who serve in the Marine Corps, the first thing they think about, besides looking at tough, is that the old recruiting tagline, the few, the proud. It really is the few and the proud. And the Coast Guard has that same mindset as well. Yep. So we, the Coast Guard, we're very selective, and that adds to what the bigger problem in our recruiting efforts is that pool of people that you get to look at diminishes, is so small that it's hard to get all the people that you want.
How is the retention for Coast Guard? They have more. It seems to me that's one of the services that would have more people staying and versus just doing 4 and heading out.
The retention for the Coast Guard has generally always been the best of any of the services. It's always been generally the best of any of the services. At one time, during my tenure as Master Chief of the Coast Guard, which was from 1998 to 2002, we had a bigger problem that people weren't getting out. And I mean, and it wasn't as much as there were jobs out, is that the job satisfaction growth was in there, and we were at a better than 90% retention rate, which of course, the domino effect of that was you weren't getting that many people in, people weren't getting advanced and so forth. But today it's roughly almost about 50% retention, which is from a workforce measure. That's where you want to be, because you need people coming in.
Sweet spot.
And to move up and so forth. The optimal, particularly with the DoD services, Department of Defense services, about a 35% is what they want. The Marine Corps, getting back to Marine Corps, the Marine Corps, 30% is their top limit. It always has been, because they need a lot of riflemen. They need a lot of E2s, E3s, E4s, but they don't need a lot of gunny
top heavy.
Right, so the Marine Corps is very, very narrow top heavy and so forth. So, and that's by design. So they don't want any more than 30% to stay in. For us, the Coast Guard, it's about 50%, and that's really an optimum number that we like.
So I want to as I want to respect everybody's time, we have Vince Patton, we have Ed Loughran. Back to the Pendleton for a second, then I want you guys, if you have final thoughts, just jump in or final questions. One of the things that's always struck me about it was those guys, I don't know why, but those guys were out there in blizzard-like conditions with no boots, gloves, ineffective. I mean, it's freezing out. They're in the middle of that thing. That's always struck me, the hypothermic aspect of it, that they survived. And it goes along with my question, Vince, about getting back, because that's when it's hard. How did Bernie get him back?
Well, that's what I said. When I think about the movie, I said I think the movie should have started after they picked everybody up.
Yeah.
Because that was the bigger challenge. How did Bernie get him back? Well, first of all, he couldn't move very fast, clearly. To his favor was he was able to ride the seas, so therefore throttling his vessel to certain types of speeds, and how he was able to get over the waves and so forth was a lot easier. But the challenge was the boat still bounced. It still went up and down. The fear of people falling out and so forth was there. And for that, it was just a case of just like, when you're freezing, no gloves, and, there were some people on there didn't even have any shoes and so forth. And, so it was really just plain old inspirational leadership of just getting people to know, in fact, Bernie said that, it was kind of a false statement of sorts, because every second seemed like an hour. We're almost there. We're almost there. We're almost there. Hang on, we're almost there. And that was his song.
Yeah.
So everybody sung that song. We're almost there. We're almost there. Or when there weren't lights up on the horizon, I can see the lights.
Yeah.
Wow.
And so it was, it was a little bit of the thing that you had to play the mind a little bit to give people hope, and to give people, that sense of belief that they can make it and they can do it. And Bernie said just at the time when he really truly saw the lights and he was almost there, and he kind of looked and says, I can't believe I did this.
Wow. Wow. That's
I'm
He was
sure.
not about to let anybody on that boat know that.
yeah.
All of a sudden he started to fall apart. That this is really happening. I'm really doing this,
Wow. Wow. That's awesome.
Incredible.
I love that picture. It's in the book, and actually it's online too. You can find it, but it's the four of them in the mess hall after, and whether they have coffee or whatever. But you look at that picture and you wonder, what are they thinking as they're sitting there? Thank God we're here.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they talked about it. That picture was, because I like I said, I had that chance to talk to Bernie, and of course the movie was actually the movie was starting to be formulated at the time. The book was being done, but when I had a chance to talk to Bernie about it, he says for the most part, after we called all those people off the boat, that's when we just started realizing what we had done.
Wow.
And was this a dream? And that picture where they were sitting there, they were all sort of trying to put it together. Well, what exactly happened?
Yeah. Oh, that's great insight.
And they all
Like that, that's so real.
their skills, their experience, and all that took over. That it wasn't textbook on it, obviously, of what they did, but yeah, that picture was right when they were sitting there trying to figure out what just happened.
Yeah, that's a great picture.
You can look at them and you could tell they all kind of look in bewilderment of, I can't believe we did that.
Yeah.
It's so inspirational. And it's so funny how that incident shaped your trajectory, and how it's probably, been an inspiration for so many others.
Yeah. Actually, do you think, would you have followed in your brother's footsteps? Like, if that hadn't happened, if you hadn't seen that picture on the wall, are you realizing, shoot, are you joining the Navy instead of the Coast Guard?
I would have gone in the Navy if it didn't happen, because like I said, I walked in that recruiting office with the full intention, after I realized I made a mistake. And for those of you who say, well, how could I have made a mistake? Well, back then, a Coast Guard uniform was the same as a Navy uniform. So I just saw the guy in a navy blue uniform, didn't even look at the sign on the door or anything. But even then, I mean, my attitude was not well, let me think about it. I mean, it was, okay, when this guy is done talking to me, I'll go find a Navy recruiter. I mean, it was, and it was that citation that changed my mind. It really was, because, you know, and I wish I could find, I'm sure the citation, if it's not online, I can find it somewhere, because that citation reads just like that book, although much shorter, obviously, but it was a novel. It read like a novel as you started reading it. And even if you didn't know anything in terms of the different, you know, like talking about the 36-footer, or talking about, you know, going over the bar and all these other things, even if you didn't really quite understand it, your mind just started moving into this whole thought process, like you're watching a movie. And that's what got me, because I read that like I was watching the movie. And when I saw Finest Hours, the movie, you know, it was amazing, because I saw it with that same, wow, that's what was going through my head.
Yeah.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's so cool.
Wow. Well, any final comments, Ed? You don't have to. I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but
I just enjoy listening to your story, Vince.
It's a great story.
It's awesome.
It really is. I remember like I told you before, the first time I heard it, when you were given the keynote at the New England Healthcare Engineers Society, it was just, you had the picture, you just led it through perfectly. And obviously, if you haven't listened to the first podcast we did, if you want your full history, go back to that one, because you're talking about core values and just leadership. And that's why I asked you the question at the beginning, Vince, about leadership, because I figured you'd have something inspirational, because that's, you know, and you'd have an answer. So I appreciate that. So to my guest, Ed Loughran from Charles River Wine Cellars, Vince Patton from the United States Coast Guard and New Day. And I wish you both happy Veterans Day to all veterans who are watching, to you. And Vince, on December 17th, the Lions and the Broncos, we will be watching.
Well, they said it'll be the beginning of third quarter, so I don't know if that'll be aired or not. I mean,
Yeah,
commercial break or whatever, but I'll post it. Somebody's gonna video that little piece of section for me, and I'll get it on LinkedIn.
what an awesome honor. Will you meet Dan Campbell?
I hope so. I asked the Lions rep. I said, look, the only guy I want to meet there is Dan Campbell. He said, well, you know, unfortunately, it's at a time you may not even get to even see him as he's walking by, because the way they're going to have me set up at the tunnel when they're coming out, going into the third quarter. So I'll see all the players going out. Some of the players actually will give me a high five or something, because they'll know who I am, because they always position that whatever that recognition person at that particular time. So I gotta hope that Dan will be one of those guys. I'll never wash the hand again.
I mean, here's a guy, you know, you're Master Chief of the Coast Guard, and you're not washing your hand because an NFL coach.
Oh, yeah, I can't say, sorry, I can't use my right hand to shake my hand. Dan Campbell touched it.
Well, good luck to the Lions, and good luck to you. And as always, I appreciate your time.
All right, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for letting me be a part of this.
Absolutely.
Very nice to meet you, Vince.
Nice to meet you as well.
And thank you, everybody, for watching this episode of the Healthcare Facilities Network. We will be back in the future with another episode. Take care.